Welcome to the newest video in my series of reading list videos. Today's reading list is devoted to the science of logic. I think that logic is one of the most important subjects that a person can study. And unfortunately, it is a subject which has become almost forgotten in our modern age. The reason I think that logic is one of the most important subjects that a person can study is that it's the most practical science in the sense that it is concerned with thinking itself. Logic can be thought of as the science of reasoning. And human beings, by nature, are predisposed to thought, to thinking. Aristotle, in the opening of his famous book, The Metaphysics, says that humans have an innate desire to learn, to understand. He also says in another famous work of his, The Politics, human beings are the only animals, the only creatures endowed with speech. So it's fundamental to our very nature to think and then to speak about what we are thinking. So logic studies reasoning itself, or reason, the faculty of reason, and how it is used as the very tool of knowledge and learning. If you study logic properly, it builds the mental habit of thinking in an orderly and correct way. So if you study logic well, it will keep you from committing errors in reasoning. The most accessible book, I think, for the study of logic in the English language is Socratic Logic by Peter Kreeft. This is published by St. Augustine's Press in South Bend, Indiana. This is the third edition, edition 3.1. The printing which I have is 2010. It was actually printed, this edition was printed in 2004, 2005, 2008, and also 2010. This is a beautifully done book. It's a hardcover. It's not available in paperback, so it is a bit on the expensive side. I'll leave the viewers to go and check up the various websites on that, but on the back of it, it says $40. I think I, in fact, paid less than that when I bought it. So you'll have to check, but it is a bit on the expensive side, but it has many, many features which render it among the best books for self-study. One of these is that it has a huge number of exercises. And it has the answers to the even-numbered exercises in the back. And if you buy the book, there's an email address that you can contact, and free of charge, they will send you, the actual publisher, St. Augustine's Press will actually send you the the answers to the odd-numbered exercises as a Microsoft Word file. So it's excellent for self-study. I think it's probably the most comprehensive book out there. It has the largest section on fallacies, which is a very specific kind of mistake in reasoning. And it does a beautiful job in all of these areas. Peter Kreeft is a contemporary Catholic Thomist or Neo-Thomist philosopher. And this is really an excellent book. So in any traditional book on logic, three things will be dealt with. They're called the three acts of the mind. The first of these is concept formation. It's often referred to as simple apprehension, how we form concepts in our minds. Then there is judgment, which is concerned with propositions. And then there is argument or reasoning. So every traditional book on logic has to cover those. A shorter book, there's far few exercises, but it's a lot more affordable, is this one, An Introduction to Traditional Logic. This is by Scott M. Sullivan. The subtitle is Classical Reasoning for Contemporary Minds. Publisher, I think this is a self-published work. However, that in no way detracts from its utility, and in no way detracts from its excellence either. It's also a very, very accessible book. In some ways, probably more accessible than Kreeft's, maybe because it's a lot shorter. But it does cover all the same areas, but it has far fewer exercises. But it is a much cheaper alternative So these two books, An Introduction to Classical Logic, Classical Reasoning for Contemporary Minds by Scott M. Sullivan, and Socratic Logic are really excellent. Now, very recently, another traditional book on logic has come out by R.E. Hauser. It's called Logic as a Liberal Art, An Introduction to Rhetoric and Reasoning. Now, this is a very recent book. It came out in 2020. I just got this in a few days ago. It's published by the Catholic University of America Press in Washington, D.C. This is also an excellent book. I think it's written on a rather high level. It has a lot of examples taken from actual texts, from real works. It also has a lot of citations from primary sources. It also refers you often to primary sources, namely Aristotle and Aquinas. But the distinguishing feature of this is that it says an introduction to rhetoric and reasoning. So in logic, obviously, you are going to be expressing your thoughts in a particular language. Now, this is an old debate on whether logic is independent of language. I don't want to get into that, but whatever the case may be, we don't just think entirely in abstractions, completely and totally divorced from any linguistic reality. So we might conceive of something or some idea for which there are no words, but ultimately we'll come up with some kind of words or a term for them, or maybe it's some kind of invention which is created, and again, we'll come up with a word for it. So you can't get away from language. And so it's very important that you be a master of the language in which you're studying logic. If German is your first language, then you need to watch a different video in German with logic textbooks in the German language. And so rhetoric and grammar are also a very important part of the study of logic. In fact, before the pandemic of bad thinking, which goes back a long way actually, logic used to be one of the fundamental subjects that people learn in school, along with what? Along with grammar and rhetoric. And if that was in the Arab world, you would study Arabic grammar, Arabic rhetoric, and then logic in the Arabic language. If you were in the medieval Europe, you would have done Latin grammar, Latin rhetoric, and then you would have studied logic in the Latin language. So Hauser's book, Logic as a Liberal Art, has a whole section which deals with grammar. It's called A Grounding in Grammar. Then he moves to Lesson 2, Rhetoric and Introduction. Lesson 3, The Canon of 5 Rhetorical Skills and the 5 Parts of Classical Speech. The 3 Rhetorical Appeals. That's, I believe, Lesson 4. So before he actually gets in to logic, which is Lesson 5, he has this extensive grounding in grammar and rhetoric. But I think this is an excellent book, and I would, if you can afford all 3, these can all be read together. But if you're only going to get 2, I would get either Socratic Logic with Logic as a Liberal Art, or An Introduction to Traditional Logic with Logic as a Liberal Art. Or if you can get all 3, if you can only afford 1 book, then I think you really need to splurge, spend a little bit more, and get this book. If you're on a very, very tight budget, then this one will also get you there. So these are really my 3 favorite books on the subject. There are some others which are more advanced texts, which you may want to read at some other point or have as works of reference. And the first of these is The Science of Logic, an inquiry into the principles of accurate thought and scientific method by Peter Coffey. It comes in 2 volumes, and these are reprints. I'm not exactly sure when they originally came out. There's a reprint series called Forgotten Books. And we can check. Yeah, these were first. Volume 1 was published in New York by Peter Smith Publishers, 1938. But these are really excellent. And then another advanced book is An Introduction to Logic by H.W.B. Joseph. H.W.B. Joseph. This is also a reprint. I think this was originally published. I'm pretty sure this was originally published by Oxford, by OUP, by Oxford University Press. The original date is in there. Doesn't matter. Another advanced presentation is Formal Logic by the French neo-Thomist philosopher Jacques Maritain. Very nice book also. One area in logic which is very important is the topic of fallacies, and there's this excellent book, Fallacy, the Counterfeit of Argument. Further to that topic of fallacies is this very fine little book, Fallacies and Pitfalls of Language, subtitled The Language Trap by S. Morris Engel. This is a Dover edition, so it's available at a very affordable price. Finally, fallacies in the area of historiographical writing. Historian's Fallacies by David Hackett Fisher. Excellent book. So, fallacies is an area that you could investigate further in logic. Also, if you're interested in the history of logic, the best and most readable account is If A, Then B, How the World Discovered Logic by Michael Schenenfeld and Heidi White. It's a Columbia University Press. However, the classic book on the history of logic, all kinds of logic, is The Development of Logic by Neil and Neil. A really exciting book. But if you're interested in the history of logic, that's something you can refer to. Logic was really big in the medieval period, and that's really the kind of logic we're talking about, the classical Aristotelian logic. And so there's an excellent book on that called The Cambridge Companion to Medieval Logic. All right, so what I've talked about so far has to do with logic books in the English language. It happens to be the case that many people who study in seminaries of some kind or another, whether that's a Catholic seminary or whether it's a Muslim or some other classical, sort of scholastic civilization like, I suppose, Tibetan Buddhism, they study logic as well. All of what I've said applies to, someone who'd be studying it maybe from a Catholic Thomist perspective. So now I just want to talk about some logic books in Arabic. The most sort of classical famous book, especially in Shiite seminaries, is a book known as the Hashia of Mullah Abdullah al-Yazdī, as Shīʿah al-Yazdī. I think he died in 981. I just have to grab that. It's over here. So here we are. This is the Hashia of Mullah Abdullah Shīʿah al-Hussein, Ibn al-Hussein al-Yazdī, died 981. 981. Hashia means like a super commentary, and the original is by a Sunni scholar, the root text known as Tahdhib al-Mantiq by Taftazani. The most famous modern textbook of logic in Shia seminaries is Al-Mantiq by Sheikh Muhammad Rida al-Muzaffar, and that's in many different editions. And there's another edition put together by someone named Sayyid Ra'id al-Ḥāኢና called Al-Muqarrar, which has commentary, very small glosses and answers to the exercises and so forth. So, as I said earlier, if you're studying logic, you really have to know the language very well in which you're studying logic. And so a lot of people, especially from the U.S., who go to study in seminaries in Iran and Iraq and so forth, they don't really know Arabic. Arabic is not really their first language, and they're plunged into a book like Al-Mantiq. So if you read one of these books in Arabic, if you're studying a traditional course of logic like that, it's very instructive to also have Kreeft, and I think Kreeft is the best for this kind of thing. I remember that book, Socratic Logic, if you read those side by side. Now, finally, I'm just going to mention some advanced texts on logic and then wrap up the video.
Sit back down on the chair and then start talking.
Advanced texts of logic. So right now we're on the topic of logic in Arabic. So there is a book called Ash-Shamsiyya fil Mantiq, and there are many, many, many commentaries on that, and they're known as Shuruh Ash-Shamsiyya. I don't know if there's a modern edition of this book. I don't have a modern edition. I have one of these. And this is actually photocopied and then bound because the paper that the book was in was really bad, and so I had it copied and so forth. So let's turn to a better page. Shuruh al-Shamsiyya. There's many commentaries in the margins on this book. So that's really what you need to refer to in advanced logic in Arabic. In the English language, this is a beautiful book. It's called Outlines of Formal Logic by John of St. Thomas. He's actually John Poinsot, but he was known as John of St. Thomas. Outlines of Formal Logic is excellent. And then there's his, another book of his on material logic. But there's more than one text. There's various treatises. And so that, oh, here it is. The Material Logic of John of St. Thomas, Basic Treatises. And then taken from that, there is a separate edition called, known as this Tractatus de Signis, the Semiotics of John Poinsot. This is a big book, very interesting stuff. But these are advanced topics. Finally, this is really an area in metaphysics, but it's related to logic as well. And that's the problem of universals, the whole debate between nominalism and realism. And so the locus classicus of that is a book known as the Isagog or the Isaruji in Arabic, although the one that's in Arabic is not really the same as the Isagog of Porphyry. So there's 5 texts on the medieval problem of universals. So they contain Porphyry's Isagog, Boethius's commentary on the Isagog, Peter of Abelard's glosses on Porphyry, and then there's John Duns Scotus's Ordinatio, and William of Occam's discussion as well. So there's 5 texts here: Porphyry, Boethius, Abelard, Scotus, and Occam. So that wraps up my video on books on logic. And again, I think the best books, where did they go? Ah, here they are. Are these 3 fundamental texts: Socratic Logic by Peter Kreeft, An Introduction to Traditional Logic by Sullivan, and Logic as a Liberal Art by Hauser. So that's my logic reading list. Again, I think logic is an extremely important subject, and everybody can benefit from the study of that, and then become better at all other subjects, because logic is used in every other subject. So please do let me know what you think of the video in the comments, and please do subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to do that. Thank you very much for watching.